Special thanks to these companies for being long-term partners of this channel.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Zach. Here we talk about overlanding and tech. And today I kind of want to talk about how to actually get into overlanding, especially if you've just started looking at vehicles. I realized last week's video, which really had a positive response, was sort of talking about how you would get into modifying your vehicle. But I didn't even think of the fact that, well, in order to start modifying a vehicle, you have to have a vehicle. And so that got me thinking into, reflecting on basically how I thought my purchasing process went of buying my 4Runner, as well as what maybe I wish I would have done when I was thinking about buying my 4Runner and thinking about buying a vehicle that I wanted to build for camping and traveling and off-roading. So these are kind of some tips and tricks and things I would do had I known all of the knowledge I do now, after talking with so many different companies, reading and watching videos for hours about modifications, the different design aspects of buying things for your vehicle, different considerations, how to budget for it. All of those sorts of things are going to kind of play into this video. So if you like sort of content like this, or you like gear install videos, you like DIY, you like tech related to off-roading, any of those things, we're going to talk about that on this channel. So if that's something you're interested in or you're into, consider subscribing to the channel. And if you like this video so far, or later on in the video, you like what I'm talking about, consider liking the video, because that really helps the channel out and helps me be able to make more content like this. So the first thing I want to talk about when purchasing a new or used overlanding vehicle is to essentially budget or buy a vehicle knowing you're just going to go absolutely crazy with your modifications. Now, this probably sounds a little bit silly, but I'm saying this because a lot of people basically decide, okay, I'm gonna get this vehicle, it's a little bit nicer, and I won't modify it as much, like that's the plan. I think that people oftentimes just think their self-control is gonna be able to hold them back from purchasing more modifications. Now, obviously take all of this with a grain of salt and you can still do whatever you choose, but if it were me, I think really being cautious about this is important, because I know that being excited about modifications can really get the best of me. And so I presume there's other people out there that can, experience this similar to me. And so when you're looking for a vehicle, just assume you're going to really buy a lot of awesome modifications for it, unless you absolutely know that you can be strict and stick to that, because ultimately you're modifying this vehicle so you can take trips with it. And so if you spend all your money up front on the vehicle and you can't modify it or take trips, well, you've kind of shot yourself in the foot. So that's the first thing. And that's one thing I kind of wish I would have done, was look at 3rd gen 4Runners, even some 4th gen 4Runners. But thinking about these things early on is pretty important. So, and I would just say, if you're interested or fascinated by off-roading or overlanding, you're probably going to get into the mods. It's hard not to. So that would be kind of my first recommendation, is just trying to figure out, what your budget is going to look like. And from there, you can kind of start to pick out what rig you're going to want. So, and I think this is actually really easy to do in some regards, because Toyotas especially, there's just more and more aftermarket support. Like, the one reason I really like the 5th gen 4Runners is I knew that there was aftermarket headlights. Like, that was one of my things that I just really wanted, because I knew that it would change the look of the vehicle, and I wanted to be able to do that. That was one of my goals. Now, some of you are gonna probably be like, well, you were building this for off-roading, you don't need fancy headlights. And like, okay, that's fine, but that was something that was really important to me. So that was one reason why I decided, a 5th gen 4Runner was something I'm interested in. But honestly, in hindsight now, I didn't probably need to buy the 5th gen 4Runner, because the aftermarket support for 4th gen 4Runners, 5th gen 4Runners before 2014, as well as just a bunch of other vehicles, there's tons of more options now. So I really limited myself by doing that. And so, just because there's this huge aftermarket support, a lot of times you can make an older vehicle look really cool now. And all you have to do is, do enough digging on Instagram and YouTube to find tons of inspiration on how to do that. So don't think you can't make an older vehicle look absolutely awesome. So along the lines of actually picking a vehicle, one thing that I've noticed that I think will be probably even more of a trend going forward is a lot of people either selling their old rig because they're upgrading to a new one, or maybe they just got into overlanding and didn't think that they would stick with it anymore. But there's a lot of vehicles on the market where you can find them with bumpers or lights or winches or suspension. And some of these can be really awesome deals, especially with armor, where if someone has a used bumper that's maybe in decent condition and fully powder coated already, that could save you a ton of money on modifications, because the bumpers, typically you can tell if they're structural or not. And if there's any sort of issues with it, then take that on a case-by-case basis. But I've seen a lot of vehicles for sale that have really good armor in really good condition. And so this is an area where you can really save some money. Now, I would caution you, depending upon what sort of modification this is, like if it's lights or if it's a winch or if it's suspension, definitely really dig into the condition of those things, because like lights might be in poor condition or the wiring is bad, the winch may be burned out, or maybe it doesn't operate properly. The other thing would be suspension. Is if you're gonna buy a rig that has suspension, if you like look under the side and you see it has remote reservoirs and you're getting all pumped because you're like, whoa, full like Icon system or King system, don't necessarily just think, oh, this is gonna be a sweet deal because I'm getting this used suspension system. Dig into the history a little bit more, because what you might find is those suspension systems have 40, 50, 70,000 miles on them. Who knows? And they're gonna need to be rebuilt soon or just completely replaced. And both of those things are expensive. So you might not really be saving yourself a whole lot of time and money by doing that. Honestly, if I were to go back and purchase a new vehicle for overlanding, I would have probably looked on the market for a used 4Runner that had a lot of that armor. And honestly, the ones that look kind of goofy with like a lot of armor and like no lift kit or things like that are going to probably be pretty sweet purchases, because think when you purchase the vehicle, it doesn't need to look cool from the get-go. So purchase something, who cares if it looks really wacky or it doesn't have half the modifications you're interested in. If you can do the math and it's a good deal, you're gonna just take half that stuff off anyways. So might as well not overpay for a cool suspension system you're gonna take off and grab that funny looking SUV that has all the armor you want, and maybe it's like, almost lowered, so to speak. So that would be my advice for looking for vehicles. And I think another thing people start to debate here is like, well, do you want an SUV or do you want a truck? And I've really, kind of wrestled with this too. Initially, I had always thought I wanted a 4Runner, but after looking into all of these different DIY options for truck beds, man, trucks look really awesome. So I think some other people on YouTube have tried to tackle this debate, and honestly, it's so personal that it's really hard to give any sort of decent advice. But where I've decided to start from is trying to figure out how much you would use a truck on a day-to-day basis. And if your sole purpose to buy a truck is to use it on a day-to-day basis, you're probably not going to be able to build it out for overlanding exactly how you like. But that's all just going to depend on how you decide to use the truck. And so, first look at how you use your vehicle from day to day. And if you are going to need to haul a lot of passengers, you're probably not going to necessarily want a truck. But depending upon the type of truck you buy, it might be perfectly fine. So what I've kind of decided to do is compare like a 4Runner to a Tacoma. So a Tacoma is going to be the same number of seats, but remember that the backseat of Tacomas is quite small, and 4Runners have a lot more space for passengers. So what you're going to be doing is sacrificing some of that passenger space for more storage space, like having the whole bed of the truck. And so, if you're the kind of person where you're not going to need very much room for passengers, then maximize your space and definitely go for a truck, because I've seen 4Runners and Tacomas go all the same places. As far as building a capable rig, that's not going to be the problem. So if you don't have as many people you need to haul, definitely go for a truck, because you're going to be able to really maximize your space. And buying a topper with a built-in rooftop tent, kind of like a Go Fast, becomes a lot more financially feasible too, because if you look at the prices of buying like a fiberglass topper or one of the fancy aluminum toppers, and then you look at the cost of buying a rooftop tent, typically combining them together is not much more expensive, if not maybe even cheaper. And across the board, except for the fact of the whole used car market being super weird right now, I've noticed that Tacomas have always typically been on the cheaper side of the spectrum compared to 4Runners. And so if you were, before this whole crazy used car market, looking at a TRD off-road Tacoma versus a TRD off-road 4Runner, when I was looking, it seemed to be that the off-road Tacoma would be cheaper. And so when you are saving some money there, that's really helpful, because then you could put that towards one of those more expensive toppers and really gain all that extra space that I'm talking about. So is that really the perfect way to approach the SUV versus truck debate? Maybe, maybe not. Like I said, it's almost, you're setting yourself up for failure when talking about that, because you're going to run into situations and exceptions for every single person where one works and the other doesn't. But I know for my application anyways, I am always wishing I had more space, and I really wish that if I had a rooftop tent on the 4Runner, that I could pass in between them without going out into the elements or into bad weather. And so, that would be one thing that would just be amazing. Now, the perfect scenario would be similar to some of those like Land Rover Defenders or Toyota Troopies that have the pop roof. Like, that would be the ultimate combination of the two, but obviously that's either a very custom job or very rare to find. So those are just some of the things that I've looked at when getting a truck versus a 4Runner. All things considered, I really love my 4Runner. I think the 4Runner is an incredibly comfortable daily, and it's great for, those times when I haul around some of my family members or friends or things of that nature. And so being able to have still a very functional day-to-day vehicle, and then also have it built out, with my quick deployable sleeping platform in the trunk, it's still very easy to quickly convert it from being this really convenient daily driver to a capable trail rig. So the next thing I would recommend is looking for higher mileage vehicles. So this may not seem super intuitive, but I think there's probably some people out there that, are perfectly fine with buying a higher mileage vehicle, especially if they're looking at older Toyotas, because a lot of them typically are. But I see a lot of people opting to get a lower mileage SR5 4Runner versus getting a higher mileage TRD off-road or a higher mileage TRD Pro. Like in my case, what I ended up deciding to do was buying a higher mileage TRD Pro instead of a lower mileage SR5 Premium. Now, when I bought my 4Runner at the market, my TRD Pro with higher miles was actually about the exact same price as SR5 Premiums with similar miles. So I really lucked out and I found a good deal. And that was before this whole market kind of completely blew everything up. And I really would, recommend to most people to do a similar thing, because what I found is with buying the higher mileage TRD Pro, I was tearing off the TRD Pro suspension because it had a lot of miles on it and it was getting tired. It still worked perfectly fine, but I was taking it off. There was brakes that I was going to be replacing, so that would be a great time to do a big brake, replacement or one of those kits. Especially also if you have any sort of concerns with your differentials, a lot of people end up re-gearing. So if you have a vehicle with 100,000 miles on your differential gears, putting brand new gears in there basically completely renews them. It's like rebuilding your differentials. And you start to realize all of a sudden that you're putting so many new parts on your vehicle so that it operates well. New aftermarket upper control arms. Some people do new lower control arms. Some people do new rear radius arms. Some people do like all new suspension. There's so many new parts you end up putting on the vehicle to make it super capable off-road. New bumpers, new skid plates, all kinds of stuff. And so all of a sudden you start realizing, wow, there's not a whole lot left of the vehicle. Completely overhauling electrical systems, putting in nicer batteries, all these sorts of things. All of a sudden, you realize, wow, half the vehicle I've almost rebuilt other than the powertrain. And the great thing is the powertrain on Toyotas is typically really reliable. So buying an engine and transmission with 100,000 miles on them is not going to be a problem in the least, because you're basically replacing all these other components that just fail over normal wear and tear, and then you've got this awesome engine. So rather than spending all this money and replacing a bunch of brand new components on like a lower mileage SR5 Premium, you're probably better off just getting a higher mileage TRD Pro or TRD Off-Road, because that thing's still going to last forever, and you're going to be able to put a bunch of new parts on and take old parts off. And so you really get a lot of value out of doing that. And I think that's one thing I've really enjoyed about having a higher mileage 4Runner is I really don't feel too bad about taking certain things off because it's probably going to come up in the schedule of maintenance somewhat soon anyways. So might as well do it now and get a sweet modification done. So lastly, I kind of want to just reiterate this theory or this approach of the buy once and cry once idea. And I think this is actually really true. And I think that it's really important when building out an overland vehicle to have a bigger plan in mind. A lot of people say, well, get your vehicle, go out there and figure out what you actually need. And to a degree, I understand that. And I kind of can appreciate them being very pragmatic about what modifications they need to buy versus don't. But the reality of the whole entire modification scene of these vehicles is a lot of people will do the functional mods, but also they like to do some of the cosmetic stuff too. And so I think just going into this with having a really good plan in place and kind of preparing for future modifications you might be interested in doing is going to be really beneficial. And so when you have that plan, you can kind of work backwards and figure out which vehicles you want. If you're going to buy a older vehicle, maybe plan on buying one of the nicer older vehicles that has a really awesome frame, because then you're going to be able to modify that for a long time and you're going to really get a lot of value out of that vehicle. Or if you're wanting to, build out a vehicle and you're thinking you're going to take it off-road pretty seriously, and you're just not quite sure what sort of trim level you want, consider buying the higher trim level earlier on and budgeting or changing your modification plans accordingly. Because the whole theory of, rationalizing with yourself in the right now and instant time so that you can kind of get something that you really want now, you're really going to regret. And so that's just one thing I would recommend is if you really think you're going to want that locker later on, obviously you can always add a locker at a later date, but most people don't tackle re-gear projects. Some people do, but I'm just going to go out on a limb and, assume that a lot of you won't ever re-gear your vehicles. And so planning ahead or just deciding, I'm going to break down and spend a little extra money on the locker trim level of my vehicle, you're probably going to be so thankful you do that in the future, because you're going to end up spending less money on multiple mods. And so spending a little bit of money up front is not going to be necessarily bad money spent, if that makes sense. Similarly too, even to like suspension systems, I think a lot of people sort of misunderstood why I said spacer lifts were so awesome in my last video. And the reason I said this was, a lot of people, I don't think necessarily know what sort of suspension they want to begin with. I think a lot of people probably just like me, I went on to forums and I tried to read a bunch of stuff about lifts. And the moral of the story is you kind of get what you pay for, but you start to have diminishing returns depending upon how much money you're spending on the really high quality systems. And so starting to learn more about how suspension works is going to be really valuable. And if you don't have the money up front to buy a really nice system, a spacer lift might be an awesome way to just get the look you want with maybe not the best ride quality, but make sure that you have the proper equipment to still run that spacer lift effectively, like having extended bump stops, maybe extended brake lines, maybe aftermarket upper control arms, certain things like that. But that will at least allow you to figure out, if you're not going to buy the exact lift you want right away, just don't spend more money than you need to until you really get the system that you're really wanting. Because if you decide to buy, let's say, a Bilstein 5100 kit, which is like the baseline suspension system you can buy, and all of a sudden you realize, oh, well, I did read online that they were kind of a rough ride, but I didn't realize it was going to be this rough of a ride. I kind of wish I would have just bought something slightly nicer or something slightly more adjustable. You're going to end up running into this issue where you spent the money on that system, you're going to sell it for less than you probably bought it for, and then you're going to buy this new system and you're going to lose some money. And all of this sort of back and forth of trying out things might be a good learning experience for you, but I think a lot of people just end up finding really frustrating. And suspension jobs are not easy. So whether you're doing it yourself or you're paying for the labor, either way, there's a ton of work in switching that stuff out all the time. So again, if you just are trying to like buy once and then cry once, that seems to really be a prevailing theme that people talked about. And honestly, the more people I talk about, the more they say that to me as well. They're just like, yeah, I wish I would have just been a little more patient and just bought what I wanted. And I think that that's probably going to be the better option. Now, one thing I will just say about modifications that I think some people do is if you're going to use some sort of financing, please, please, please do the financing versions where there's 0% interest. Like, I think anyone could say that investing in modifications or your vehicle is probably not the best financial advice. And this channel is not about financial advice, and I'm not telling you what to do, but I'm just saying that if it were me, and this is always what I've tried to do, is like try not to finance anything except for maybe just your vehicle. Like, that's totally understandable. But as far as car parts, like, they typically depreciate in value pretty quickly. So just if you're wanting to get something really awesome, buy once and cry once, but also don't buy once and then pay double the price once because you have to pay a lot of interest. Just be patient, and honestly, when you start stacking up mods, it all takes time to even put on the vehicle. So, you know, waiting a little bit of time might be a lot easier than you think, especially for the lead times currently just in this market of buying modifications. It's kind of the nature of just being patient for exactly what you want when you order it. And so, you know, waiting a couple extra months to really get that exact modification you're looking for, I'm gonna stand behind you and just say to wait out and buy once and cry once. So in summary, I hope this video was helpful for you. I wanted to put together a video where I talked about how I would have approached purchasing my overlanding rig. Honestly, I just feel like your vehicle is such a core element to overlanding that it's hard to not talk about purchasing a vehicle when you're getting into overlanding. So that would be sort of how I would have done it had I gone back and done it all over again. Just remember that, you know, when you're shopping for vehicles, to look for some modifications that maybe are tasteful and in good condition and things you'd be interested in doing in the future where you can save on that depreciation. And when looking into vehicles, especially if you're gonna find something higher mileage or older, to just do good research on the VIN of the vehicle, because Carfax aren't necessarily always up to date. And so checking that VIN to make sure there wasn't some sort of salvage title auction or things like that in the past, you're gonna be really happy that you just did some of that research before purchasing the vehicle. And again, you know, buy once and cry once. And make sure that if your vehicle is coming with modifications when you purchase it, to do some asking around to figure out what condition they're in, because it may not be a good deal to get those modifications with the rig. So with that being said, thank you so much for watching. If you like this sort of content like this, or you like these videos more than the installs and DIY content I do, you know, drop a comment and just let me know what you think about this style of content. Also, you know, drop a comment if you have anything you want to debate or discuss about these things. I love talking about it in the comments, so as long as you keep it respectful. But thank you so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content like this. Give it a like if it brought you any sort of value, and I will catch you all in the next video.